So if we discuss about ruins, I think we cannot skip Marc Auger as a French anthropologist and philosopher, just because we need also to define the range of studies and more, the power of ruins, if there's any. The sight of the ruin allows us to grasp the existence of a time that is not what the history books write about or that restoration tried to bring to life. It's a pure time, no data, absent from our world of images, simulacra and reconstruction, from this our violent world whose rubble no longer have the time to become ruins, a lost time that art sometimes manages to find. In addition to that, he started to define known places, which is actually very much related with several discussions I heard in the last 2 days. These known images, as Auger called them, and where spectacularization confuses reality in its representation, substitute or can substitute the dimensionization of the tourist images of simulacra and copies. The power of ruin is, in fact, the ability to actualize the time under his different forms, hypostating a temporal distance, which cancels any possible simulacra and spectacularization of their reality. So one of the questions for my presentation today, is the digital virtual the simulacrum of the past? And if it is, how does it work? Well, the first revolution in the digital world is in data collection. So I know that we were very much focused when we talk about sites and museum about presentation, which is correct, of course. But then we forget what's going on several times. Look here, the estimate in billions of smartphone users up to 2019, which is just an estimate, okay? We are going to have over 5 billions of users, which is over the double of the human population. We never had a kind of revolution in the history of human beings. Look, this is about transmission of knowledge, not about culture itself. It's more than that. And more precisely, right now we have maybe more, 4.77 billions of users and over 10 billions of gadgets, which means a lot of digital technology and in many ways customizable. So how many realities we have? Well, it's my job to try to classify, at least to keep updated with the state of the art, and I'm sure it's not complete, but you can have discuss about augmented reality, virtual reality, haptic reality, artificial intelligence, computer graphics, smart reality, which is something I like very much, and we'll explain why later on, holograms and more. So what is really cutting edge is the interaction. So if it's the 90s, there is the age of computer graphics, video, and so on. Now we interact in many ways. We interact in the real world. We process data in archaeology, for example, through remote sensing, classification, digital taxonomy in museum. We do reconstruction, simulation, mediated reality, and we use now a lot of smart technologies. Sensor, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robot, and the like. Some example of what I call mediated reality and selfie mania, which is actually something we should study more in detail because the experience of the tourist is more through this frame rather than the traditional way of picturing or taking picture. So the selfie mania is also an individual experience in a new environment, which is not just ruins, of course, but it's the experience of ruins, the experience of the site and so on. Or the fact that there's a lot of focus on the data capturing and not anymore maybe on the empirical experience. That's why sometimes the mediated reality is more effective in the experience of the user rather than the real interactive experience. So this is an old experiment. I can recall us the power of smartphone in the data collection. You know, the iPhone 8, for example, has a very sophisticated sensor with an artificial intelligence algorithm inside. Well, we can collect, of course, 1 billion of photos and as well generate 3D models very quickly. So what's the impact of that? So we start with some numbers. Well, this, for example, is what we create every day. So 2.5 quintillion of bytes And the fact that 90% of the data, of the world's data today is being created in the last 2 years. It's amazing, right? That we think that we manage the knowledge of the world. Which knowledge of the world we actually manage? What we think are managing? What kind of threats are behind this revolution? What kind of benefits? So this is mostly my discussion today. Well, I want to quote also a scholar of law of the UC Davis that so about 3D printing, public domain, copyright, and the like. 3D scan and print technologies hold the potential to undermine the value placed on the original cultural artifact based upon the rarity and aura. This technology will eventually enable the creation of digital and physical copies. They are maybe one day indistinguishable from the originals. They can convert public domain works whose intellectual value has been confined in a physical object. So in the last, in the last 20 years, we have this kind of let's say, the development in the domain of digital interaction, digital data processing. So I try to compare simulation processes versus visualization. So in the past, we were working mostly on basic interaction. Now we are more focused on feedback, behaviors, the study of the embodiment, passive user versus content provider. So there's a lot of bottom-up work in the digital management. So we do not control very much the content. The content comes from social media several times. It comes from the individual experience rather than from the authorship of scholars, or there is an interaction between the two. We have a different user engagement, collaborative environment, different kind of immersivity. Data are switched immediately from digital to digital. The analog is a kind of old school, old-fashioned model, and we deal with cyber communities all the time. So the fact that the interaction deal with massive production of digital. Also, I'm an archaeologist, so I can just quickly show you what happens, the little revolution in my excavation. You see here at an archaeological site in Italy, Vulci, where we start in 2014. In a few years, you see that we generate terabytes of data, and also because of the digital photogrammetry we use for data collection, data capturing, we have an exponential growth of data capturing, which means a lot of problems as well because we have to manage all of it. Examples come from drones, very revolutionary applications worldwide, not just in the cultural heritage. In archaeology, it's extremely revolutionary for many reasons. I can tell you that right now with a system like the EB we are using in our site, we are able to generate up to 5,000 photos every day, 30,000 at the end of the week, 300,000 at the end of the season, in theory. So this means we can produce model, digital elevation model, virtual reality model, augmented reality products, and more, but most of them are maybe unprocessed, and they are just part of our digital archive. We also create from scratch a digital excavation 3D. It was revolutionary a few years ago, now it's the practice. So we deal with 3D models from scratch in the excavation. So at the end of the day, they are already 3D model. What about possible challenges about all these data collections? Well, let's start a long time ago when I worked in China, in Xi'an, and I started to collect by laser scanning a long time ago, over 15 years ago, object in a museum basement, for example. And we start to collect some of them for the creation of the Western Han Dynasty Virtual Museum. I'm very pleased that we have a Chinese colleague here. This is thanks to the collaboration with the Jiaotong University in China. And we start with a little, of course, collection of objects, funerary objects, in order to contextualize some tombs. Han Dynasty tomb, they don't exist anymore. So that's one problem. So the digital could solve or somehow could approach the fact that there's a lot of heritage which has a very short life. The tombs with wall paintings I'm showing here, they exist just virtually now, just because there are other construction, after other constructions, there are new buildings on top of them, so they're not visible anymore. And this is one of them in Xi'an. In Rome, we have another impossible challenge where in the Museum of Imperial Flora, where we are approaching 40,000 of fragments belonging to the Basilica Ulpia. So one of the architectural masterpieces of the Emperor Trajan. And this is another case where we need to create the basilica, which is actually something completely unidentified and maybe unknown from the perspective of the typical international tourists in Rome. So they don't see the basilica because it's a mix with other buildings in a so-called Trajan's Market area. So 40,000 fragments in order to virtually rebuild the basilica, which doesn't exist anymore, but also to create a 3D repository for a public access to all of them, and we need to reclassify them and so on. Now we are starting, with, of course, with a very small sample, but since my interaction, hopefully my collaboration with the local institution will be also hopefully thinking about the future infrastructure. I have to tell you, this is a great challenge, but not just for Rome, it's for any site worldwide. I like impossible challenges because they push us, they force us to think. Just because it's impossible, we think, well, we're going to lose. But that's why you have this kind of creativity. So we now working on exhibition in Rome, so we are very pleased to, if you are around, to come on November 29 in Rome. So we're going to open the exhibition on the dedicated to Emperor Trajan, but also with several installations, like this one dedicated to the recomposition of several fragments. I'll give you an idea of the life of a digital object, just very shortly. So this is, it's a statue of Trajan, so a fragment of the statue of Trajan, actually located in a museum, in the museum basement, not accessible yet to the public. Then after a few photos, it's a cloud of point. And after a few cloud of point becomes a mesh. And after the mesh becomes maybe an app, and so on. So after that, which is, I know, I'm trying to simplify, generalize, and there are more issues at the end, but we have to face the data visualization simulation in digital terms. So, and that's there are my questions, where are we? And then I collected some example. Oculus Rift was an interesting revolution in the domain of game, also museum work. I'm very proud to say that we opened a virtual museum in Italy in 2014, a few months before other big museums in Europe start to use Oculus Rift for the public consumption and also for the public use of augmented reality tools and virtual reality tools. So this is a reconstruction of a Roman basilica in the city of Reggio Emilia, Reggio Lepidi, my own city in Italy. And the virtual museum here is hosted inside an archaeological museum. So the two entities are together. And this is something I'd like for this audience to discuss maybe further. So how we can make compatible real collection with digital tools. You know, in the past there was unfortunately total marginalization of the digital. I remember the case of the Louvre a long time ago, where you have a room with some multimedia stuff and then they have the collection. I don't think this is a particularly challenging in terms of communication, but it's hard sometimes to make the digital compatible with the visit of a collection. This is the museum. I'm happy to say that the first day of opening of the virtual museum inside the archaeological Roman collection, the museum had 5,000 visitors. So it means 5,000 tickets sold in a day, which is actually what they sold in 9 months, typically. So I mean, I don't want to overestimate that. I'm saying that we need to possibly catalyze attention. We need to help the visitor to understand the importance of real objects through also digital collections. This is another interesting, almost impossible challenge. The Museum of Western Han Dynasty was designed in collaboration with the CTU University of Hong Kong and at the time my University of California. And I give you just a short video about the installation. It was actually a virtual room where where several visitors could experience the virtual museum in in a short visit of immersive visit. So you can here browse 3D funerary object, 3D tombs, and you have seen in the background digital landscape, which is based on Chinese painting. So it's a kind of imaginative space with some 3D reconstructions. It's already old because it was made in 2013, so it's still a long time ago to me, and in terms of technology. But you give an idea of that the Western tombs I'm talking about are now visible just in West Y. They don't exist anymore in the empirical world. So, and this is, of course, it's a pity, but it recalls to me also the importance of digital heritage in relation to the ICOMOS UNESCO vision of heritage, because there's something empirically existing just in the virtual domain. How can we call that? I don't know, but that's something we need to face in the future. The more will come. Other experiment. A question for you: how do you envision this? What do you see? Not the content, but the installation. What do you think it's about? It's a floor, it's a desk, it's a video. Can you guess? Well, it's of course it's an hologram in this case, but you see the hologram, it's printed over 2 millimeters of flat tile. Okay, so and if you go around, so you see that you can experience this without any glasses and so on. Why I bring this to your attention? Just because this is the opposite process. It comes digital and becomes analog. So we are now reversing sometimes also the holographic perception through that. And this will be part of the Rome installation, so I hope that you can see it in action in Rome. So this is part of our work with students in my classes of virtual museum. We use a lot of augmented reality tool for mapping archaeological site, and again for using smartphones instead of computers. That's because it's more portable, cheap, easy, and actually very and give them a lot of motivation because they use a device they have in their pocket. That's why we need to know what to do with over 6 billion or 5 billion of smartphones, right? This is another immersive simulation system we use at Duke University. It's called Duke Immersive Virtual Environment. So of the excavation or archaeological site we study and we create virtually. This is a Çatalhöyük in Turkey in particular, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site as well. It's a visually simulated process in a cave. So the Duke is an immersive 6-sided cave. Another prototype I co-created with Todd Barrett, is our designer at Duke University. It's called TITA, Tangible Interactive Table for Archaeology. It's based on mixed use of haptic or smart technologies with virtual reality. So you play with 3D prints, in other terms, and you see the result in the video projection. So this is something we like to experiment more because you know, there are several ways to simulate, to have an experience with, I would call hands-on experience with the real world, so what I can touch, and an object like a Roman temple, for example, and you see the projection of the temple and the repuzzling or recontextualization of the building in a Roman forum. So this is now an educational tool for us, but it can be easily customized. So the project is open source. Everybody can, including you, can download all the codes. You can print the object. You can even print the desk, and you can have it, you know, at home. So this is an example of 3D printing with digital open source software together. Questions more maybe difficult to approach, but even methodologically relevant for our job. So are 3D models and printers replicas or new objects? How we can create, how we can consider them? Do they generate new knowledge, and which knowledge? Are these models with no context, digital ruins? Because this is the problem of all this digital. There's a lot of massive production. If this massive production has has a different taxonomy, so it's not like labeling an object, for example, in a museum collection, or publishing a paper. in a book or in a conference proceedings. It's something different. And there are concerns. They are concerned because when the production is so huge, so impacting, we need to check what are the benefits and what a community like us, very multidisciplinary, should do for. I try here to itemize some pros and cons. I know it's an incomplete list, but I hope that it's enough provocative for the final discussion. So in terms of risk, well, authenticity. How can we approach authenticity in that specific framework of work versus dissemination? So for millions and billions of copies and so on. Copyright versus accessibility, ethical issues, communication, content validation. Ethical issue means also making object compatible with the local communities. You know, in the United States, they are destroying statues just because they are not acceptable for the Afro-American population and mostly for the new generation of people. Just because they recall the Civil War and slavery, for example. They are objects. Look, they are not in the Nero times. They are not Akhenaton. It's today. Okay, so this is something that where we, community, should face in many ways. And more, the content validation, and which means what the role of authorship, museums, institutions, and so on, and the public engagement. Individuals want to say, want to interpret very much bottom-up. Manipulation versus cultural transmission, technological colonization versus learning experience, interaction, feedback. The museum's industrialization and the lost heritage rescue, like the case of the Western Han Dynasty we have seen before. So at the end, we can have a proliferation of bad or misinterpreted replicas, but we can have at the same time a large-scale hands-on experience, for example. I conclude with a few additional critical comments about digital ruins. I try to use this conference for rethinking at least my mission of scholars and my work in a public as a public scholar. So we define ruins, archaeological remains related to the past, which require visually imaginative reconstruction or to be interpreted. This is happen every day, even out of here. But the massive reproduction of digital artifacts requires, for sure, new interpretation and recontextualization. The uncontrolled large-scale proliferation of digital and printed copy generates new hybrid items, which are mostly unclassifiable. So we call this digital fabrication of heritage that maybe has to deal with traditions, memories, and the past. Thank you. So we call also them big data, just because you see that they generate billions of information unit, quintillion of data, and so on, with no context. That's why that what is not contextualizable to me is already digital ruins. It's a digital, unfortunately not able to communicate, so it's not part of the human learning process or the transmittable human knowledge to the future. So what about the new digital knowledge based on massive data set? I think we need new infrastructures, we need new libraries, we need new ways to categorize this before it's too late. So main issue is really data archiving, data management, data classification, metadata, whatever you want to call them. What is the future of human knowledge? That's something I really, really love to discuss with my classes and also with many colleagues and friends. Well, I think we are, from the technological perspective, in the hands of artificial intelligence, robot and machine learning is what we should expect for. Thank you.